thoughtful ideas and suggestions for guests and topics.
Great events, programs, and student activities.
All the factors are listed.
Hello and welcome to this week's segment of Dialogue Houston. I'm your host, Lawrence Payne. To our regular viewing audience, welcome. To those joining us perhaps for the first time here for HCC's TV Dialogue Houston, we can be found now every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 a.m. and again at 6 p.m. and Saturday afternoons at 3 p.m. As always, the top of our hour, let me thank you very much for your calls, emails, and text messages from previous shows we've aired, but particularly your great ideas for guests and topics and subjects to be aired on upcoming segments of Dialogue Houston. For after all, this is your community affairs, public affairs show, now proudly in its 27th season. We have a great show planned for you today. We're going to look at an aspect of the community around what U of H downtown is doing in a very special way. And we're going to explore some issues around public service and what does that look like and mean in 2020. And in the second show, we're going to have a great Dr. Ann Benefield from the League of Women Voters on to talk about all things we need to know about this upcoming election. And also followed by our good friend Carmen from the Houston Public Library, who's going to tell us about some great things that are happening there. So without further ado, let me just welcome Dr. Jerry Wallace Jr., who is the Associate Dean of the College of Public Service, UH Downtown. Welcome, Jerry.
Glad to be here, sir.
All right, so let's start off. Let me frame this and the following show that goes with it. Voting is what gets breath to democracy. Voting is what gives breath to democracy. It's all about voting. You can't say you're a public servant. You can't say you care about civic engagement. You can't call yourself a citizen without voting. It all is and always has been the hallmark of democracy is whether or not one votes. And so coming up to this discussion about public service, U of H downtown has a wonderful College of Public Service, and here's kind of the description of it. Public service is about listening intently to people and then observing, thinking, talking, and taking action. It's about doing something together that none of us can do on our own. I think that's a great phrase. So in the world of public service, let's just dive in, Jerry. How do we see public service being done today? Forget COVID for a moment, even though COVID does enter into this. When we talk about public service and we talk about commitment to public service, and as you instill that in those young people at UH downtown, what do y'all talk about? How do you approach and address this subject matter?
Well, first and foremost, it's important to understand that it is a humane issue. Being a public servant hasn't anything to do with the race or gender or age or class of the individuals that you're serving. It has to do with supporting all of them. And being a public servant coming from our college, these are some of the values that our faculty instill into our curriculum. When we talk about supporting students in both undergraduate and graduate programs, in criminal justice, education, and then in social work, it's important that our students know and recognize that they're going to go into communities potentially with individuals who may not have a shared experience, individuals who may come from all different kind of walks of life and different experiences. And it's important to know that it is a humane issue. We are a public servant. You're gonna get in the mud, in the muck and the mire, and it's important to be able to provide resources to the communities where you're gonna go in to serve. So our curriculum is steadily improving. We're consistently talking about ways to support cultural competency in our coursework, to support implicit bias conversations around faculty, staff, and student development within our college, and how do we prepare students to transition back into these communities to support a variety of individuals and be effective in that, so we can support, of course, not only Greater Houston, but the state and the nation.
How has the dialogue changed since the days of in a post-George Floyd environment? U of H downtown is one of the most diverse, ethically, racially universities in the country. It is designated as a person of color serving university Its population is people of color predominantly, and is going to be put into service in serving a community. Now, according to our good friend Steve Kleinberg at Rice University, that we're now in a majority minority city, and going forward, that's only going to be more so. So when we talk about serving people and serving people of color by predominantly people of color, how has that changed the dynamics and dialogue with the changing demographics of how we see and understand our calling to serve the other, who in this case is getting to be less and less someone different than me? It is beginning to be more and more that someone who looks like me that I'm probably going to be helping and serving. So how has that dynamic changed the reality of the discussion?
So the narrative has greatly changed. If you go to 25, 30 years ago, which to be honest is really not that long, you're talking about early, mid 1990s, you're talking about the city of Houston starting to develop a more culturally diverse community of students, of families who are now going to college. So those individuals, as they move in, as they migrate from various places, as they have children, and those children grow up and become adults and have families and so forth on, now you're talking about how do we go back into our own communities? How do we help communities that we may have grown up in that were low socioeconomic at a time, that didn't have the many resources or amenities? How do we now go back into those communities as professionals in our fields and be able to impact those communities and make them stronger and better, provide resources and continue to move them forward? So when you talk about, post George Floyd, of course, I think George Floyd's situation, as tragic as it was, I think it opened everybody's eyes. Their eyes should have already been opened. I mean, because we're not just talking about George Floyd. I mean, Sandra Bland was right out here in Wallace County a few years ago, right outside of Prairie View. So you're not talking about, issues or situations that haven't already been occurring when we talk about social justice, or when we talk about the impact as it faces, people of color specifically. You're talking about now we have, administrators, you have leaders, executives in a variety of spaces who can work with students in our communities to help influence change, not tomorrow, but right now, today. So the narrative has definitely pushed us forward, if anything, to be more proactive, more present in in the families' lives that we serve, but to equip the students to be advocates. First and foremost, to be advocates for themselves, to be able to understand what goes on in policies and practices, what happens behind the scenes, so that way they can be more informed, more engaged themselves, so that way they can become advocates for their communities. And education helps to prepare that pipeline and pathway.
It does. So let me take what you just said and run with it a moment. If the shift is not away from service but toward justice, not either or but both and to understand the necessity now that to talk about social justice and what does it mean to be a social justice advocate. To quote our dearly departed great friend John Lewis, we have been too quiet for too long. There comes a time when you have to say something, you have to make a little noise, you have to move your feet, and this is the time. So it seems to me that as a student on a university campus, anywhere, and a person of color student particularly, that this idea of understanding, as you said so well, wedding not only the need for service and charity and all the things that go with taking care of immediate needs, but to become a real advocate for social justice and change, to really understand what that entails and be willing to understand the commitment and accountability that goes with that, to be able to stand up, show up, speak up, and follow up, and do it in a way that not only is you as a human being get fulfilled, because now you're really standing for something, but also understand that by standing for others, you help serve the communities in which you're now being educated to go out and do. So my question, I guess, in a roundabout way, is social justice, that component, is that now really being emphasized more and beginning to take its root in the whole idea of the expanded curriculum?
Social justice in context is not necessarily a new form. I mean, even when we go back to the days of Mickey Leland and what he stood for, and the time period that has transitioned now in present Houston, social justice has always been at the forefront to some degree around specifically our Black leaders, individuals who, like John Lewis, who you mentioned. But now you have a new generation of students. You have individuals who have technology at their fingertips, who can record and show, and they can access information more readily. But I think the concept has to be is what are we infusing in our curriculum, to your point? Because as institutions, we have to take a more direct approach. As we talk about UHD, and you mentioned the demographics of students that we have. So when you talk about the dynamics of who these students will become and the communities where they will serve, it is upon us as administrators to not only inform these themes into our curriculum, into our pedagogy, to put theoretical framework, to allow students to engage in research, to participate in community engagement activities, but to also create programs on campus, sustainable programs on campus, programs that are not initiatives, but programs that are university and institutionally led. Program, in my opinion, should not be solely based on a particular individual or individuals, because if those individuals transition on and the program dies, then it was never held on to by the institution. So when we talk about these platforms to better equip and inform our students, social justice then becomes the undercurrent of the mission, of the strategic goals, of the institutional framework that is built into every aspect of the university. It's not just only goes into the marketing and the branding of, specifically in our college, College of Public Service, but it goes into the action of the faculty. It goes into the action of the staff. It goes into advising services, testing services, counseling, mental health, disability, wellness, into student programs, curriculum, organizations, and so forth. As a College of Public Service, brand ourselves so individuals can and will know that this is the place to come, to go back into your communities, to be effective today. And that you're going to get, sound curriculum that will help that, which means we as faculty, we as staff and administrators also have to stay informed. We have to consistently stay engaged with our communities. An example would be presently working with Houston Independent School District. We're working on a pathway to support male students of color to get degrees in education. So this was something that we've adopted in partnership with them from Clemson University, which has the Call Me Mr. program. So the effort is to put more men of color back into teaching, so they can go in and disrupt school to prison pipelines, to be mentors and community engagements in their respective school district, and to provide students with individuals who look and represent themselves. So our Department of Education is working diligently with that program, among many other programs, as we talk about what that looks like, as social justice themes look like in our curriculum.
Let me ask this question, because since you're on a university campus, I think the important piece, and I don't disagree with anything you said, but I think the important piece to wade into this in 2020 is the question of economics. And to understand and help the students understand from an interdisciplinary context that you can do so readily on a university campus to connect all of these, because they're not independent pieces. They're interrelated, they're interconnected, they're interdependent on each other. To help them understand the equity question from an economic perspective, not only of the social justice piece, but what does it mean to be a racial equity advocate, which we've been training people to do, to move to be a racially equity broker. And the difference between the advocate and the broker is the broker understands the economics of change. They understand the economics behind public policy. They understand the idea of no money, no mission. They understand how important who controls the money controls the power. Who controls the purse string controls our destiny. And that the marching and the demonstrating, all that is important. But the next step is really the changing of the public policy. And public policy always has to do with power, and power always has to do with money. Who controls the money? Who has the money? So unless we're teaching the economics of social change around the equity question, then we miss a big part of it. I think part of the frustration of the movement are movements in service and advocacy and justice from day one to now 2020, is that the economic aspect has been somewhat overlooked or not emphasized enough. So the change we're seeking, we're not able to get. That's why the frustration, the stress, the anger, the resentment comes, because we've never addressed the money. And until we address the money, we're not going to get the results we're looking for. So in a service, in a college of public service, as you said, all the elements you mentioned, all the different aspects of the program, the piece I did not hear is the money. So I want you to speak to that a little bit.
I think you frame a great argument. Institutions, period, whether you are PWI, HBCU, HSI, MSI institution, um, it is about the money. When you talk about funds coming from the state, when you talk about funds that are being allocated among departments, the development of these programs, the enhancement and engagement of students of color, it does boil down to the money. Quite often you have programs who write grants to support development in the institution. We've had an opportunity to do that, working with the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board and being able to receive a grant to support specifically male students of color. But you also have communication and connection with your executive leaders, working with them to make sure that they set aside funding for these programs so programs can be able to utilize students with additional access. Because when you talk about access, when you talk about technology, when you talk about exposure, the bottom line does come down to the funding. But it also comes down to community engagement. What are the other individuals in the community who need to know about these initiatives? What are the people, programs, corporate spaces who have additional funding, who can say, hey, you know what, we value this. We value these specific group of students, and we would love to provide opportunities for them to come into our spaces and lead and grow and development. So I think even as an institution, we have to do better, as we will do, to engage our corporate and community partners. Because at the end of the day, we're talking about students and programs and communities to a certain degree who may be first generation, who may be low socioeconomic, who may come from a variety of backgrounds, where college was not readily accessible to them. So when we talk about scholarships, when we talk about opportunity for funds for travel, students to study abroad and see different things, administrators really have to take upon themselves to develop. We have a board that we're forming specifically in the College of Public Service, and we have a group of advisors who are working with us specifically in our college to create additional avenues to be able to support our students as we continue to build into social justice in these components. Because we know that social justice, as we have these conversations, quite often, as you talk about the advocate or the broker, quite often we're doing a lot of talking, a lot of marching, but the pen isn't writing the check. So you know that for myself specifically, and I also know for our college, that's why we've taken upon ourselves to actually connect with community partners and leaders to help us have a stronger narrative and help us build our brand and our marketing standard to support social justice. We can be able to support our students' learning development as they move forward into the communities.
So what do you see as the next step in this process, as you so well laid out the process that you're involved in now? Even in this COVID-19 environment where we're forced to do everything virtually, what do you see as the next step? You know, we're in the middle of an economic pandemic, health crisis, job loss, you name it, and persons of color are being impacted worse than anyone else in all areas. And yet we have an election coming up, and we have a political season coming up with potential for change and perhaps addressing some of the issues that are impacting our communities. So when we talk about public service and the students being involved in this civic engagement piece going forward for this fall, do we see a big voter registration drive? Do we see a push for voter turnout? Do we see them being really put to bear on for such a time as this in the great force that they could be?
Great question. I want to highlight something that UHD, our Student Government Association, does quite well. Every year we have a walk to vote that our president and our executive leaders, our student government president, they lead and they do an exceptional job doing that. We take students down to the polls downtown and we get them registered to vote and we vote. I can absolutely say for sure that I know that it's definitely something that we're going to push for very strongly this year. Again, dealing with the COVID pandemic, I know there's going to be conversations around how best to do that, but that is important for our community to do. The College of Public Service definitely has those conversations that we're having. We have established a lab, or what we call the Lab for Equity in Action, which is a part of our Center for Public Service and Community Research. And what that lab entails to do is to be able to communicate to our various constituents in our community, starting first and foremost with our students, to be able to inform implicit bias conversations around them so they can talk more directly about, again, voters' rights, what's going on in their educational spaces and teaching students, what's going on with cultural competency and being relevant and understanding relevant themes is what's happening today, working with criminal justice spaces and social work, being advocates in those areas. So what we want to be able to do in the lab is to definitely push these agendas as what's about to happen. As you talk about the Democratic Republican race that's about to happen, we have a window now. If at any point in time in our nation, at least in the past 30 years or so, where we have to make moves now. The time for talking, strategizing, walking and marching, I think we've done that to a great degree. But now when we talk about infusing these things into our curriculum and communicating this to our local constituents, and by constituents and stakeholders, I don't just mean the communities themselves, I mean executives and people in power in great spaces of what we're doing in our college. Because these are things that even going into our fall semester, as we navigate them through COVID, how are we going to best do these things? But I know that our Lab for Equity in Action, we're doing some great work. We've collaborated with a couple of centers on campus. We talk about critical race theory and how that impacts our communities. We talk about vital voices, where we bring in executive leaders on campus to talk specifically about what's happening in their areas to be able to inform policy and practice. We have an opportunity to meet with various offices and constituents. All of these things are things that now have to be at the forefront. And again, going back to your earlier statement around funding and resources, it takes that. It takes that to do that, but it also takes us telling a narrative that as a college, we're going to put this first on our agenda, and we're going to make sure that everyone that we come in contact with is equipped to do these things.
You have at UHD some great seminars and webinars, et cetera. Some of them are open to the public, are they not? And some of them you sponsor that you
Yes.
can access and have links to. Just for our wonderful viewing audience, can you let us know of any of those that are coming up in the next few weeks or in the fall that we may avail ourselves of?
Absolutely. I mentioned just momentarily Vital Voices. Our wonderful colleague, Mr. Stephen Volano, is our director for our center, and he hosts a series called Vital Voices through the fall and through the spring. Some of those dates are being outlined now, but prior to COVID, these would be evening sessions where we would invite key speakers from our community in various spaces to come in, and this is a public forum, and they would come in and talk to us in our building around what's happening in their area. So those dates are going to come out here probably within the next week. We're actually starting classes on Monday, August 24th. But you can also go to our website. You can go to our College of Public Service website if you just want to go to uhd.edu. And you're going to click on academics at the top. And if you click on academics, you're going to see College of Public Service. Once you click there, it's going to take you to our college specific page, and there's going to be information there around Vital Voices. It's going to have those dates and that information posted and who those speakers will be. An example would be we've had our district attorney come and speak with us. We've had our sheriff come to speak with us. Our constables come to speak with us. Some of them are also graduates specifically from our college. We've had key restaurant owners come and speak. We've had leaders from TEA, Texas Education Agency, come and speak, and they've been addressing social justice needs in our communities. Also in the spring, our Center for Critical Race Studies, which is another area in the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, hosts the residents and scholar in residence. And they often bring in another speaker who will essentially be here for a week long, and they have different venues on campus for students, faculty, staff, and the public. And at the center of their conversation is social justice. In the past, we've had Cornel West to come in and speak and engage with us around these topics. And this is how we as an institution begin to promote to our community what we're doing. But even more so, again, just to be able to echo this, we have to do some things different. We have to do some things more direct. We have to make sure that our students are not only coming to us for just completing a degree, but becoming more equipped to be able to go back into these communities and support specifically people of color, because we do know that this is the group that we're talking about. And everyone has to get on board. I truly believe that. And whoever you are, male, female, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, you are definitely needed in this journey. And everyone is appreciated in this work. There is no discrimination in this space. There is equity that we're talking about here among all groups. But we want to make sure that specifically for our college that you do, again, look for vital voices, look for our scholar in residence, and look for various things coming out from the center, and then in equity and action in our lab as well that will be both public for you to engage in. Be looking for that on our college webpage.
Well, Jerry, I want to thank you. This has been very informative, and you've given us some great information. I've enjoyed over the years working with the team there at U of H downtown, Dr. Vida and others that you have mentioned. Please say hello to everybody for me. We're going to continue to follow the great work of the College of Public Service as we get into the fall. And there are some other opportunities for some other aspects there at UHD that I want to probably do a follow-up show where I connect to 2 or 3 disciplines that are working kind of in relationship to each other in some of the areas that we've been talking about. I think that would be a fascinating dialogue to have and to pursue that. So I want to just thank you again, and we look forward to the great work that you're doing and the wonderful young people that you're turning out to be dedicated public servants and understand really what it means to be a servant leader and how to exercise that properly. And as we've talked many times, it is all about the relationships that are built between each other, relationships of mutual trust and respect that allows the work to happen, because nothing happens without trust. Nothing happens without trust. And so that's a very important component that we've built into it. So I'll just close this segment with a quote from John Lewis, because I think it very much fits where we are today. When you see something that is not right, not just not fair, you have a moral obligation to say something, to do something. Our children and their children will ask us, what did you do? What did you say? For some of us, this vote may be hard, but we have a mission and a mandate to be on the right side of history and to do the right thing that benefits all human beings. So that's kind of where we are. We're at this inflection point in history in so many areas at the same time. Someone said it's God's gift, God, Yahweh, Allah, Buddha's gift to us at this time in history. And it just depends on what we do with it and how we rise to the occasion and how we give breath to the spirit of democracy in our voting and our taking care of each other as human beings in the nurturing aspect of our lives. So it's really been great. Jerry will continue to do this, and we'll follow the work. So I'm going to have to get out of here. This is the ending time for this segment of Dialogue Houston. We look forward to you joining us in future segments. We continue to ask you to be safe and be well. Take care of each other, nurture each other, have compassion and love for each other, and look out for your fellow human being. And until then, as always, peace, power, and love.